Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In the tranquil apartment, serenity was only interrupted by gentle sounds, the whispering fabric, the faint tap of heels on hardwood. Sunbeams played across the space through partially open curtains, bathing the living room in a gentle radiance. A lone figure, transfixed before the full-body mirror, gently caressed the smooth fabric of the crimson cocktail dress sheathed around them. Deep breaths heralded momentary introspection as Michael marveled at his metamorphosis in the reflection. The silk dress, alien yet captivating, conformed to his body, revealing newfound contours. His ordinarily trim and tidy brown hair appeared oddly supple, framing his countenance with newfound allure. He pivoted, captivated by the dress's fluidity, the way it glistened beneath the sunshine's caress.
"Only for the weekend,"
he whispered, experiencing a symphony of emotions, exhilaration and trepidation, that seemed to quicken his heartbeat. His roommate, Sarah, was supposed to be away until Sunday evening. He had the whole place to himself, a perfect opportunity to explore this side of himself he'd kept hidden for so long. Michael took a tentative step forward, wobbling slightly in the red heels he'd paired with the dress. He'd never worn anything higher than dress shoes before, and the 4-inch stilettos were proving to be quite the challenge. But he was determined to master them, at least enough to walk around the apartment without toppling over. He took another step, then another, gradually gaining confidence. The click of the heels against the floor was oddly satisfying, each step feeling more natural than the last. Michael smiled at his reflection, a sense of rightness washing over him. The sound of a key in the lock shattered the moment. Michael froze, panic surging through him. Sarah wasn't supposed to be back yet. He looked around frantically, searching for an escape route, but it was too late. The door swung open, and there stood Sarah, suitcase in hand, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Time seemed to stand still as they stared at each other. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with excuses, apologies, anything to explain away this moment. But before he could speak, Sarah's expression softened. "Michael?" she said, her voice gentle and free of judgment.
"Are you okay?"
The question caught him off guard. He'd expected anger, disgust, but not this, not concern. Michael swallowed hard, fighting back tears he hadn't realized were forming.
I'm sorry,"
he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper.
"I didn't mean to. I'll take it off right away."
Sarah set down her suitcase and closed the door behind her. She approached Michael slowly, as if afraid of startling him. "Hey, it's all right," she said softly. "You don't have to apologize. And you don't have to take it off if you don't want to." Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. You're not mad?" Sarah shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "No, I'm not mad. A little surprised, maybe, but not mad." She paused, studying Michael's face. "How long have you been wanting to try this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Michael took a shaky breath, realizing this was a moment of truth.
A long time,"
he admitted. "I've always been curious, but I never had the courage to explore it?" Sarah finished for him. When Michael nodded, she reached out and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Well, if you want, I could help you." Michael's eyes widened. Help me? What do you mean? Sarah's smile grew. I mean, if you want to explore your feminine side, I'd be happy to teach you a few things. Makeup, walking in heels, whatever you're interested in learning. The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that Michael felt tears welling up again. You'd really do that for me? Of course, Sarah replied, without hesitation. That's what friends are for, right? Now, how about we start with those heels? You look like you could use some practice. For the next few hours, Sarah patiently guided Michael through the basics of walking in high heels. They laughed together as he stumbled and wobbled, but with each attempt, he grew more confident. By the end of the impromptu lesson, Michael was strutting across the living room with surprising grace. You're a natural, Sarah praised, clapping her hands. Now, how about we try some makeup? Michael hesitated for a moment, then nodded eagerly. Sarah led him to her room, where she sat him down at her vanity. She explained each product as she applied it, teaching Michael about foundation, concealer, and the art of contouring. As Sarah worked, Michael watched his reflection transform. With each brush stroke and blend, his features softened, becoming more feminine. When Sarah finally handed him a mirror to see the full effect, he gasped.
Is that really me?
He whispered, touching his face gently. Sarah beamed.
It sure is. What do you think?
Michael stared at his reflection, taking in the subtle, smoky eye, the hint of blush on his cheeks, and the deep red lipstick that matched his dress perfectly.
I love it,
he said, his voice thick with emotion.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know how to repay you for this.
You don't have to repay me, Sarah assured him. But I do have one question. When you're like this, dressed up and feeling feminine, do you prefer a different name? The question caught Michael off guard. He'd never considered it before, but now that Sarah mentioned it, it felt right to have a different name for this side of himself. He thought for a moment, then smiled.
Lucille,
he said.
I think I'd like to be called Lucille.
Sarah nodded approvingly. Lucille it is then. It suits you. Over the next few weeks, Sarah continued to help Michael, now often going by Lucille, explore his feminine side. They went shopping together, building a wardrobe that allowed Lucille to express herself fully. Sarah taught her about skincare routines, hairstyling, and even helped her practice speaking in a softer, more feminine voice. As Lucille grew more confident in her feminine presentation, she began to realize that this wasn't just about dressing up or exploring. This was who she truly was. The more time she spent as Lucille, the more right it felt, and the more uncomfortable she became with having to return to being Michael. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Lucille turned to Sarah with a serious expression. Sarah, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I think I might be transgender. Sarah paused the movie and turned to face her friend. Are you sure? She asked gently. Lucille nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm Lucille. The thought of going back to being Michael, it feels wrong now, like I'm putting on a costume. Sarah pulled Lucille into a tight hug. Then be Lucille, she said simply. Be who you are, who you've always been inside. I'll support you every step of the way. With Sarah's unwavering support, Lucille began her transition in earnest. She started hormone therapy, letting her brown hair grow out and embracing her true self fully. There were challenges, of course. coming out to friends and family, dealing with the occasional stares or unkind comments from strangers. But through it all, Lucille stood tall, confident in who she was. Months passed, and Lucille's transformation continued. Her features softened further, her body reshaping itself to match her true identity. She became more comfortable in her own skin with each passing day, her confidence growing along with her hair. One sunny afternoon, almost a year after that fateful day when Sarah had caught her in the red dress, Lucille stood before the same full-length mirror. This time, she wore a flowing sundress, its yellow fabric bright against her skin. Her brown hair, now past her shoulders, was styled in loose waves. Sarah appeared behind her, smiling at their reflections. "You look beautiful, Lucille," she said warmly. Lucille turned, embracing her friend tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. I don't know where I'd be without you." Sarah hugged her back just as fiercely. "You'd still be you," she said. "I just helped you find the courage to show the world who you've always been inside." As they parted, Lucille wiped away a happy tear. "Well, are you ready for our girls' day out?" Sarah grinned, linking her arm through Lucille's. "Absolutely! Let's show the world how fabulous you are!" They left the apartment together, stepping out into the bright sunshine. Lucille walked with confidence, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. She held her head high, a bright smile on her face, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As they strolled down the street, Lucille couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. From those first tentative steps in borrowed heels to now, living authentically as herself. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth every moment. They arrived at their favorite cafe, a quaint little place with outdoor seating perfect for people watching. As they settled into their chairs, a waiter approached with menus.
"Good afternoon, ladies,"
he greeted them with a warm smile.
"What can I get for you today?"
Lucille felt a thrill run through her at being addressed as a lady without hesitation. It was moments like these that reinforced she had made the right decision. "I'll have an iced latte, please," Lucille said, her voice soft and feminine, the result of months of practice and vocal training. "Make that too," Sarah added with a wink. As the waiter walked away, Sarah leaned forward, a mischievous glint in her eye. "So, Lucille, I couldn't help but notice that cute guy at the bookstore was totally checking you out last week." Lucille felt a blush creep up her cheeks. There were a few awkward moments, a few slips of old pronouns, but overall, the transition at work went smoother than she could have hoped. One Friday evening, as Lucille was packing up to leave for the weekend, a colleague from the marketing department stopped by her desk.
"Hey, Lucille,"
he said, a friendly smile on his face.
"A bunch of us are going out for drinks to celebrate landing the new account. Want to join us?"
Lucille hesitated for a moment. She hadn't really socialized much with her coworkers since beginning her transition, partly out of nervousness, but the invitation seemed genuine, and she realized she wanted to go. "That sounds great," she said, returning the smile. "I'd love to." The bar was crowded and noisy, but in a pleasant way. Lucille found herself relaxing as she chatted with her colleagues, laughing at jokes and sharing stories. It felt good to be included, to be seen as just another one of the team. As the night wore on, Lucille excused herself to use the restroom. She stood in front of the mirror, touching up her lipstick, when another woman entered. The woman did a double take, then narrowed her eyes. "You don't belong in here," she said coldly. Lucille felt her heart sink. She had been fortunate so far to avoid this kind of confrontation, but she knew it was bound to happen eventually. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I have every right to be here," she said calmly, meeting the woman's gaze in the mirror. The woman opened her mouth to argue further, but before she could speak, the door opened again. One of Lucille's co-workers, Amanda, walked in. She took in the scene quickly, stepping up beside Lucille. "Is there a problem here?" Amanda asked, her tone friendly, but with a hint of steel beneath it. The woman looked between them, then huffed and left without another word. Amanda turned to Lucille, concern written across her face. "Are you okay?" Lucille nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude towards her coworker. "I'm fine. Thank you for that." Amanda squeezed her arm gently. "Of course. We've got your back, Lucille. Always." As they rejoined the group, Lucille felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had faced adversity and come out the other side, stronger for the experience. And she wasn't alone. She had friends, colleagues, and Sarah supporting her every step of the way. The night ended on a high note, with promises to do it again soon. As Lucille walked home, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was living her truth, facing her fears, and building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. When she got home, she found Sarah curled up on the couch, reading a book. "Hey," Sarah said, looking up with a smile. "How was your night out?" Lucille kicked off her heels and flopped onto the couch beside her friend. "It was really good," she said, a content smile on her face. "There was a small incident in the bathroom, but overall it was wonderful. I feel like I'm finally finding my place in the world." Sarah set her book aside, turning to face Lucille fully. "I'm so proud of you. You know that? You've come so far in such a short time. You're an inspiration, Lucille." Lucille felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've been my rock through all of this." They hugged tightly, the kind of embrace that spoke volumes without a single word. As they pulled apart, Lucille wiped her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "So," she said, her voice light, "what do you say we have a girls' night in? Face masks, rom-coms, and ice cream?" Sarah grinned, already reaching for the TV remote. "I thought you'd never ask." As they settled in for their impromptu movie night, Lucille felt a sense of contentment wash over her. This was her life now, authentic, challenging at times, but ultimately beautiful. She was Lucille, inside and out, and she was finally, truly happy. The credits of their second movie were rolling when Sarah turned to Lucille with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I was thinking about what you said earlier, about finding your place in the world. Have you ever considered getting involved in advocacy work?" Lucille paused, the spoon of ice cream halfway to her mouth. "Advocacy? You mean like for transgender rights?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. You have such a powerful story, Lucille, and you're so articulate and passionate. I bet you could really make a difference." The idea hadn't occurred to Lucille before, but now that Sarah mentioned it, it sparked something inside her. She thought about all the challenges she'd faced, all the fears she'd overcome. How many others were out there, struggling with the same issues, feeling alone and afraid. I don't know," Lucille said slowly. Do you really think I could do something like that? I know you could, Sarah said without hesitation. You've already come so far.
Think about how much you've learned, how much you've grown. You could use that experience to help others.
Lucille set her ice cream aside, her mind racing with possibilities. Where would I even start? Sarah grinned, pulling out her phone. Well, as it happens, I did a little research. There's a local support group that meets twice a month. They're always looking for speakers to share their experiences. It could be a good place to start. Lucille felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness bubble up inside her. The thought of speaking in front of a group was daunting, but the idea of potentially helping others who were going through what she had experienced was incredibly appealing. Okay, she said finally, a determined smile spreading across her face. Let's do it. Sign me up. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of preparation. Lucille spent her evenings writing and rewriting her speech, practicing in front of the mirror, and for Sarah. She wanted to strike the right balance between honesty about the challenges and hope for the future. On the night of the meeting, Lucille stood in front of her closet, agonizing over what to wear. She wanted to look professional, but approachable, confident, but relatable. Finally, she settled on a soft green sweater and black slacks, an outfit that made her feel both comfortable and put together. Sarah drove her to the community center where the group met, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze before she got out of the car. You've got this, Lucille. Just speak from your heart. Lucille took a deep breath, smoothing down her sweater one last time before entering the building. The meeting room was already half full when she arrived, people of all ages and backgrounds, chatting in small groups. A woman with a kind smile approached her. You must be Lucille, she said warmly. I'm Elena, the group facilitator. We're so glad you could join us tonight. Lucille shook her hand, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Thank you for having me. I'm a little nervous, to be honest. Elena patted her arm gently. That's perfectly normal. Just remember, everyone here is on your side. We're all here to support each other. As the meeting began and Elena introduced her, Lucille felt a sudden calm come over her. She looked out at the faces in the room, saw the hope and curiosity in their eyes, and knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. She began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. She shared her story, the fears, the doubts, the moments of triumph. She talked about the support she'd received from Sarah and her coworkers, and the challenges she'd faced along the way. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding in understanding, saw tears in some eyes, and smiles on other faces. She realized that her story, unique as it was to her, resonated with so many others in the room. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause. People came up to her afterward, thanking her for her honesty, sharing bits of their own stories. Lucille felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of connection she hadn't expected. As she left the community center that night, Lucille knew this was just the beginning. She had found not just her place in the world, but a way to make that world a little better, a little more understanding. Sarah was waiting for her in the parking lot, a proud smile on her face. How did it go? She asked, as Lucille slid into the passenger seat. Lucille beamed, her eyes bright with excitement. It was amazing, Sarah. I think I've found my calling. As they drove home, Lucille's mind was already spinning with ideas for future speeches, for ways she could get more involved in advocacy work. She felt energized, purposeful, in a way she never had before. Back at the apartment, as they settled in for a late-night cup of tea, Sarah raised her mug in a toast. To Lucille, she said, who's not just living her truth, but helping others find theirs. Lucille clinked her mug against Sarah's, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friend, for this journey, for the life she was building. To new beginnings, she added softly. As she sipped her tea, Lucille reflected on how far she'd come from that day she first tried on Sarah's red dress. She had discovered not just who she was, but what she was capable of. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, she was truly excited to see where it would lead.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!